Hi all, Larry Powell II here with another reading video where I'm reading from the Eye of the World, Book 1 in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. And today I'm going to be reading chapter number 47. Chapter 47, More Tales of the Wheel. An itchy restlessness had ran pacing beside the dining table. 12 strides, the table was exactly 12 strides long, no matter how many times he stepped it off. Irritably, he made himself stop keeping tally. Stupid thing to be doing. I don't care how long the bloody table is. A few minutes later, he discovered that he was counting the number of trips he made up the table and back. What is he saying to Moraine and Lan? Does he know why the Dark One is after us? Does he know which of us the Dark One wants? He glanced at his friends. Perrin had crumbled a piece of bread and was idly pushing the crumbs around on the table with one finger. His yellow eyes stared unblinking at the crumbs, but they seemed to see something far off. Matt slouched in his chair, eyes half closed, and the beginnings of a grin on his face. It was a nervous grin, not amusement. Outwardly, he looked like the old Matt, but from time to time he unconsciously touched the Shadar Logoth dagger through his coat. What is Spain telling her? What does he know? Well, at least did not look worried. The Ogier was studying the walls. First he had stood in the middle of the room and stared, turning slowly in a circle. Now he was almost pressing his broad nose against the stone while he gently traced a particular join with fingers thicker than most men's thumbs. Sometimes he closed his eyes as if the feeling was more important than seeing. His ears gave an occasional twitch, and he muttered to himself in Ogier, appearing to have forgotten anyone else was in the room with him. Lord Agelmar stood talking quietly with Neneve and Egwin in front of the long fireplace at the end of the room. He was a good host, adept at making people forget their troubles. Several of his stories had Egwin and giggles. Once even Neneve threw back her head and laughed and roared with laughter. Rand gave a start at the unexpected sound and jumped again when Matt's chair crashed to the floor. Blood and ashes, Matt growled, ignoring the way Neneve's mouth tightened at his language. What's taking her so long? He righted his chair and sat back down without looking at anyone. His hand strayed to his coat. The Lord of Fardara looked at Matt disapprovingly. His gaze took in Rand and Perrin without any improvement, then turned back to the women. Rand's pacing had taken him close to them. My Lord, Egwin was saying, as glibly as if she had been using titles all her life. I thought he was a warder, but you call him Dashan and talk about a golden crane banner. And so did those other men. Sometimes you sound almost as if he's a king. I remember once Moraine called him the last lord of the Seven Towers. Who is he? Neneve began studying her cup intently, but it was obvious to Rand that abruptly she was listening even more closely than was Egwin. Rand stopped and tried to overhear without seeming to eavesdrop. Lord of the Seven Towers, Agelmar said with a frown. An ancient title, Lady Egwin. Not even the High Lords of Tyr have older, though the Queen of Andar comes close. He heaved a sigh and shook his head. He will not speak of it, yet the story is well known along the border. He is a king, or should have been. Aulan Mandragoran, Lord of the Seven Towers, Lord of the Lakes, crownless king of the Malkiri. His shaven head lifted high, and there was a light in his eye, as if he felt a father's pride. His voice grew stronger, filled with the force of his feeling. The whole room could hear without straining. We of Shannara call ourselves bordermen, but fewer than 50 years ago Shannara was not truly of the borderlands. North of us and of Arafel was Malkir. The lances of Shannara rode north, but it was Malkir that held back the blight. Malkir, peace favor her memory, and the light illumine her name. Lan is from Malkir, the wisdom said softly, looking up. She seemed troubled. It was not a question, but Algamar nodded. Yes, Lady Nineveh. He is the son of Akir Mandragoran, last crowned king of the Makir. How did he become as he is? The beginning perhaps was Lane, Onadair Lane, Mandragoran, the king's brother, led his lances through the blight to the blasted lands, perhaps to Shayogul itself. Lane's wife, Rayan, made that dare for the envy that burned her heart, that Al-Akir had been raised to the throne instead of Lane. The king and Lane were as close as brothers could be, as close as twins even after the royal Al was added to Akir's name. But jealousy racked Rayan. Lane was acclaimed for his deeds, and rightfully so, but not even he could outshine Al-Akira. He was man and king, such as comes once in 100 years, if that peace favor him. And Eliana Lane died in the blasted lands with most of those who followed him. Men Malkir could ill afford to lose. And Brian blamed the king, saying that Shalgul itself would have fallen if Alkir had led the rest of the Malkir north with her husband. For revenge, she plotted with Cowan Gemalan, called Cowan Fairheart, to seize the throne for her son Isam. Now Fairheart was a hero almost as well loved as Alakira himself, and one of the great lords. But when the great lords had cast the rods for king, only two separated him from Akir, and he never forgot that two men laying a different color on the crowning stone would have set him on the throne instead. Between them, Cowan and Brayon moved soldiers back from the blight to seize the seven towers, stripping the border forts to bear garrisons. But Cowan's jealousy ran deeper. Disgust tinged Agamar's voice. Fairheart, the hero whose exploits in the blight were sung throughout the borderlands, was a dark friend. With the border forts weakened, Trollocs poured into Malkir like a flood. King Alakir and Lane together might have rallied the land, but they had done so before. But Lane's doom in the blasted lands had shaken the people, and the Trolloc invasion broke men's spirit and their will to resist. Too many men, overwhelming numbers, pushed the Malkir back into the heartland. Brienne fled with her infant son Isam and was run down by Trollocs as she rode south with him. No one knows their fate of a certainty, but it can be guessed. I can find pity only for the boy when Cowan Faintheart's treachery was revealed, and he was taken by young Jan Charon, already called Jan Farstrider. When Fairheart was brought to the seven towers in chains, the great lords called for his head on a pike. But because he had been second only to Alakir and Lane in the hearts of the people, the king faced him in single combat and slew him. Alakir wept when he killed Cowan. Some say he wept for a friend who had given himself to the shadow, and some say for Malkir. The lord of Valdara shook his head sadly. The first peal of the doom of the seven towers had been struck. There was no time to gather aid from Shinar or Arafel, and no hope that Malkir could stand alone with 5,000 of her lances dead in the blasted lands, her border forts overrun. Alakira and his queen Eliana had land brought to them in his cradle. Into his infant hands they placed the sword of Malkir kings, the sword he wears today, a weapon made by Aes Sedai during the War of Power, the War of the Shadow, that brought down the age of legends. They anointed his head with oil, naming him Dishan, a diademed battle lord, and consecrated him as the next king of the Malkir. And in his name they swore the ancient oath of Malkir, kings and queens. Agamar's face hardened, and he spoke the words as if he too had sworn that oath, or one much similar. To stand against the shadow so long as iron is hard and stone abides. To defend the Malkir while one drop of blood remains. To avenge what cannot be defended. The words rang in the chamber. Eliana placed a locket around her son's neck for remembrance, and the infant, wrapped in the swaddling cloths by the queen's own hand, was given over to 20 chosen from the king's bodyguard, the best swordsmen, the most deadly fighters, their command, to carry the child to Falmaran. Then did Akira and Elaine lead the Malkiri out to face the shadow one last time. There they died at Herat's crossing, and the Malkiri died, and the 7 towers were broken. Shinar and Arfel and Kandar met the half-men and the Trollocs at the stair of Jahan, and threw them back, but not as far as they had been. Most of Malkir remained in Trolloc hands, and year by year, mile by mile, the blight has swallowed it. Agamar drew a heavy-hearted breath. When he went on, there was a sad pride in his eyes and voice. Only 5 of the bodyguards reached Balmara alive, every man wounded, but they had the child unharmed. From the cradle they taught him all they knew. He learned weapons as other children learned toys, and the blight as other children their mother's garden. The oath sworn over his cradle is graven in his mind. There is nothing left to defend, but he can avenge. He denies his titles, yet in the borderlands he is called the Uncrowned, and if ever he raised the golden crane of Malkir, an army would come to follow. But he will not lead men to their deaths. In the blight he courts death as a suitor courts a maiden, but he will not lead others to it. If you must enter the blight, and with only a few, there is no man better to take you there, nor to bring you safely out again. He is the best of the warders, and that means the best of the best. You might as well leave these boys here to gain a little seasoning and put your entire trust in land. The blight is no place for untried boys. Matt opened his mouth and shut it again at a look from Rand. I wish he'd learned to keep it shut. Nenev had listened just as wide-eyed as Egwin, but now she was staring into her cup again, her face pale. Egwin put a hand on her arm and gave her a sympathetic look. Moraine appeared in the doorway, Land at her heels. Nenev turned her back on them. What did he say? Rand demanded. Matt rose and Perrin too. Country oath. Agamar muttered, then raised his voice to a normal tone. Did you learn anything, Aes Sedai, or is he simply a madman? He is mad, Moraine said, or close to it, but there is nothing simple about Padan Fain. One of the black and gold liveried servants bowed his way in with a blue wash basin and pitcher, and a bar of yellow soap and a small towel on a silver tray. He looked anxiously at Agamar. Moraine directed him to put them on the table. Your pardon for commanding your servants, Lord Agamar, she said. I took the liberty of asking for this. Agamor nodded to the servant, who put the tray on the table and left hurriedly. My servants are yours to command, Aes Sedai. The water Moraine poured into the basin steamed as if only just off the boil. She pushed up her sleeves and began vigorously washing her hands without regard for the heat of the water. I said he was worse than vile, but I did not come close. I do not believe I have ever met someone so abject and debased, yet at the same time so foul. I feel soiled for touching him, and I do not mean for the filth on his skin. Soiled in here, she touched her breast. The degradation of his soul almost makes me doubt he has one. There is something worse to him than a dark friend. He looked so pitiful, Egwin murmured. I remember him arriving in Emma's Field each spring, always laughing and full of news from outside. Surely there's some hope for him. No man can stand in the shadow so long that he cannot find the light again, she quoted. The Aes Sedai toweled her hands briskly. I have always believed it so, she said. Perhaps Padan Fain can be redeemed, but he has been a dark friend more than 40 years, and what he has done for that, in blood and pain and death, would freeze your heart to hear. Among the least of these, though not small to you, I suspect, he brought the Trollocs to Emmonsfield. Yes, Rand said softly. Heard Egwin gasp. I should have guessed. Burn me, I should have, as soon as I recognized him. Did he bring any here? Matt asked. He looked at the stone walls around them and shivered. Rand thought he was remembering the Myrddraal more than Trollocs' walls had not stopped the fate at Berlon or at Whitebridge. If he did, Agamar laughed, they'll break their teeth on the walls of Valdara. Many others have before. He was speaking to everyone, but obviously addressing his words to Egwin and Nynaeve from the glances he gave them. And do not worry yourselves about half-men either. Matt's face reddened. Every street and alley in Valdara is lit by night, and no man may hide his face inside the walls. Why would Master Fain do that? Egwin asked. 3 years ago, with a heavy sigh, Moraine sat down, folding up, as if what she had been with Fain had drained her. 3 years this summer, as far back as that. The light surely favors us, else the Father of Lies would have triumphed while I still sat planning in Tarbalon. 3 years. Fain has been hunting you for the Dark One. That's crazy, Rand said. He's come into the Two Rivers every spring as regular as clockwork. Or as regular as a clock. 3 years. We've been right there in front of him, and he never looked at any of us twice before last year. The Aes Sedai pointed a finger at him, fixing him. Fain told me everything, Rand, or almost everything. I believe he managed to hold back something important, despite all I could do. But he said enough. 3 years ago, a half-man came for him in a town in Mirandi. Fain was terrified, of course, but it is considered a very great honor among dark friends to be so summoned. Fain believed he had been chosen for great things, and he had, though not in the manner he believed. He was brought north to the Blight, to the blasted lands, to Shao Ghul, where he met a man with eyes of fire who named himself Balzamon. Matt shifted uneasily, and Rand swallowed hard. It had to have been that way, of course, but that did not make it any easier to accept. Only Perrin looked at the Aes Sedai as if nothing could surprise him any longer. The light protect us, Agamar said fervently. Fain did not like what was done to him at Shao Ghul. Moraine continued calmly. While we talked, he screamed often of fire and burning. It almost killed him, bringing it all out from where he had it hidden. Even with my healing, he is a shattered ruin. It will take much to make him whole again. I will make the effort, though, if for no other reason than to learn what more he still hides. He has been chosen because of where he did his peddling. No, she said quickly when they stirred not the Two Rivers only, not then. The Father of Lies knew roughly where to find what he sought, but not much better than we in Tarvalon. Fain said he had been made the Dark One's hound, and in a way he is right. The Father of Lies sent Fain to hunt, first changing him so he could carry out that hunt. It is the things done to bring about those changes that Fain fears to remember. He hates his master for them as much as he fears him. So Fain was sent sniffing and hunting through all the villages around Berlon, all the way to the mountains of mist and down to the Terran and across into the Two Rivers. 3 springs ago, Perrin said slowly. I remember that spring. Fain came later than usual, but what was strange was that he lingered on. A whole week he remained idle and gnashing his teeth about laying out money for a room at the Wine Spring Inn. Fain likes his money. I remember now, Matt said. Everybody was wondering, was he sick or had he fallen for a local woman? Not that any of them would Marry a peddler, of course, as well marry one of the traveling people, Edwin said, raising an eyebrow at him, and he shut his mouth. After that, Fane was taken to Shalgul again, and his mind was distilled. Rand's stomach turned over at the tone in the Essedai's voice. It told more than of what she meant than the grimace that flashed across her face. What he had sensed was concentrated and fed back. When he entered the Two Rivers the next year, he was able to choose his targets out more clearly. Indeed, more clearly even than the Dark One had expected. Fane knew for a certainty that the one he sought was one of three in Emmonsfield. Perrin grunted, and Matt began cursing in a soft monotone that even the Nim's glare did not stop. Agomar looked at them curiously. Rand felt only the faintest chill and wondered at it. 3 years the Dark One had been hunting them. He was sure it should have made his teeth chatter. Moraine did not allow Matt to interrupt her. She raised her voice enough to be heard over him. When Fane returned to Lugard, Balsamon came to him in a dream. Fane abashed himself and performed rites that would strike you deaf to hear the half of them, binding himself even more tightly to the Dark One. What is done in dreams can be more dangerous than what is done awake. Rand stirred at the sharp, warning look, but she did not pause. He was promised great rewards, power over kingdoms after Balsamon's victory, and told that when he returned to Emmonsfield, he was to mark the three he had found. A half-man would be there waiting for him with Trollocs. We know now how the Trollocs came to the Two Rivers. There must have been an Ogier grove and a waygate at Manetheren, the most beautiful of all, Lowell said, except for Tarvalon. He had been listening as intently as everyone else. Manetheren is remembered fondly by the Ogier. Agomar formed the name silently, his eyebrows raised in wonder. Manetheren. Lord Agomar, Moraine said, I will tell you how to find the waygate of Mafaldar the Daranel. It must be walled up in a guard set, and then allowed near. The half-men have not learned all of the ways yet, but that waygate is to the south and only hours from Faldara. The Lord of Faldara gave himself a shake as if he were coming out of a trance. South, peace, we don't need that. The light shine on us. It shall be done. Did Fane follow us through the ways? Perrin asked. He must have done. Moraine nodded. Fane would follow you three into the grave, because he must. When the Myrddraal failed at Emmonsfield, it brought Fane with the Trollocs on our trail. The Fade would not let Fane ride with him, although he thought he should have the best horse in the Two Rivers and ride at the head of the band. The Myrddraal forced him to run with the Trollocs, and the Trollocs to carry him when his feet gave out. They talked so that he could understand, arguing about the best way to cook him when his usefulness was done. Fane claims he turned against the Dark One before they reached the Terran, but sometimes his greed for his promised reward seeps into the open. When we had escaped across the Terran, the Myrddraal took the Trollocs back to the closest waygate in the mountains of mist and sent Fane across alone. He thought he was free then, but before he reached Berlon, another Fade found him, and that one was not so kind. It made him sleep doubled up on himself in a Trolloc kittle at night to remind him of the price of failure. That one used him as far as Shadar-Lagoth, but then Fane was willing to give the Myrddraal his mother if it would free him. But the Dark One never willingly loosens a hold he has gained. What I did there, sending an illusion of our tracks and smell off toward the mountains, fooled the Myrddraal, but not Fane. The half-men did not believe him afterward. They dragged him behind them on a leash, only when we seemed to keep always just ahead, no matter how hard they pressed, did some begin to credit him. Those were the 4 who returned to Shadar Lagoth. Thane claims it was Balsamon himself who drove the murder. Agamar shook his head contemptuously. The Dark One paused. The man's lying or mad. If Heartsbane were loose, we'd all of us be dead by now, or worse. Thane spoke the truth as he saw it. Moraine said he could not lie to me, though he hid much. His words, Balsamon appeared like a flickering candle flame, vanishing and reappearing, never in the same place twice. His eyes seared the Myrtle, and the fires of his mouth scourged us. Something, Lan said, drove 4 Fades to where they feared to go, a place they fear almost as much as they fear the wrath of the Dark One. Agamar grunted as if he had been kicked. He looked sick. It was evil against evil in the ruins of Shadar Lagoth. Moraine continued, biting bile. When Thane spoke of it, his teeth chattered and he whimpered. Many Trollocs were slain, consumed by Mashadar and other things, including the Trolloc that held Thane's leash. He fled the city as if it were the pit of doom at Shao Ghul. Thane believed he was free at last. He intended to run until Balsamon could never find him again, to the ends of the earth if necessary. Imagine his horror when he discovered that the compulsion to hunt did not lessen. Instead, it grew stronger and sharper with every day that passed. He could not eat except what he could scavenge while he hunted you. Beetles and lizards snatched while he ran. Half-rotted refuse dug from midden heaps in the dark of night. Nor could he stop until exhaustion collapsed him like an empty sack. And as soon as he had strength to stand again, he was driven on. By the time he reached Camlin, he could feel his quarry even when it was a mile away. Here in the cells below, he would sometimes look up without realizing what he was doing. He was looking in the direction of this room. Rand had a sudden itch between his shoulder blades. It was as if he could feel Fane's eyes on him then, through the intervening stone. The Aes Sedai noticed his uneasy shrug, but she went on implacably. If Fane was half mad by the time he reached Camlin, he sank even further when he realized that only 2 of those he sought were there. He was compelled to find all of you, but he couldn't do no other than follow the 2 who were there either. He spoke of screaming when the waygate opened in Camlin. The knowledge of how to do it was in his mind. He does not know how it came there. His hands moved of their own accord, burning with the fires of Balsamon when he tried to stop them. The owner of the shop who came to investigate the noise Fane murdered. Not because he had to, but out of envy that the man could walk freely out of the cellar while his feet carried him inexorably into the ways. Then Fane was the one you sent following us, Egwin said. Lan nodded. How did he escape the black wind? Her voice shook. She stopped to swallow. It was right behind us at the waygate. He escaped, and he did not. Moraine said the black wind caught him, and he claimed to understand the voices. Some greeted him as like to them. Others feared him. No sooner did the wind envelop Fane than it fled. The light preserve us, Loyal's whisper rumbled like a giant bumblebee. Pray that it does, Moraine said. There is much yet hidden about Padan Fane, much I must learn. The evil goes deeper in him, and stronger than in any man I have yet seen. It may be that the Dark One, in doing what he did to Fane, impressed some part of himself on the man, perhaps even unknowingly some part of his intent. When I mentioned the eye of the world, Fane clamped his jaws shut. But I felt something knowing behind the silence. If only I had the time now, but we cannot wait. If this man knows something, Agamar said, I can get it out of him. His face held no mercy for dark friends. His voice promised no pity for Fane. If you can learn even a part of what you will face in the blight, it's worth an extra day. Battles have been lost for not knowing what the enemy intends. Moraine sighed and shook her head ruefully. My lord, if we did not need at least one good night's sleep before facing the blight, I would ride within the hour, though it meant the risk of meeting a Trolloc raid in the dark. Consider what I did learn from Fane. 3 years ago, the Dark One had to have Fane brought to Shao Ghul to touch him, despite the fact that Fane is a dark friend dedicated to his morrow. 1 year ago, the Dark One could command Fane, the dark friend, through his dreams. This year, Balsamon walks in the dreams of those who live in the light, and actually appears, if with difficulty, at Shadar Lagoth, not in his own body, of course, but even a projection of the Dark One's mind, even a projection that flickers and cannot hold, is more deathly dangerous to the world than all the Trolloc hordes combined. The seals on Shao Ghul are weakening desperately. Lord Agomar, there is no time. Agomar bowed his head in acquiescence, but when he raised it again, there was still a stubborn set to his mouth. Aes Sedai, I can accept that when I lead the lances to Tyrion's Gap, we will be no more than a diversion or a skirmish on the outskirts of the real battle. Duty takes men where it will, as surely as does the pattern, and neither promises that what we do will have greatness. But our skirmish will be useless, even should we win, if you lose the battle. If you say your party must be small, I say well and good, but I beg you to make every effort to see that you can win. Leave these young men here, Aes Sedai. I swear to you that I can find 3 experienced men with no thought of glory in their heads to replace them, good swordsmen who are almost as handy in the blight as Lan. Let me ride to the Gap, knowing that I have done what I can to help you be victorious. I must take them and no others, Lord Agomar, Moraine said gently. They are the ones who will fight the battle at the eye of the world. Agomar's jaw dropped, and he stared at Rand and Mat and Perrin. Suddenly the Lord of Fardara took a step back, his hand groping unconsciously for the sword he never wore inside the fortress. They aren't. You are not Red Ajah, Moraine said I, but surely not even you would. A sudden sweat glistened on his shaven head. They are Ta'veren, Moraine said soothingly. The pattern weaves itself around them. Already the Dark One has tried to kill each of them more than once. 3 Ta'veren in one place are enough to change the life around them as surely as a whirlpool changes the path of a straw. When the place is the eye of the world, the pattern might weave even the father of lies into itself and make him harmless again. Agomar stopped trying to find his sword, but he still looked at Rand and the others doubtfully. Moraine Sedai, if you say they are, then they are, but I cannot see it. Farm boys, are you certain, Aes Sedai? The old blood, Moraine said, split out like a river breaking into 1,000 times 1,000 streams, but sometimes streams join together to make a river again. The old blood of Manetheren is strong and pure in it, and pure in almost all these young men. Can you doubt the strength of Manetheren's blood, Lord Agomar? Rand glanced sideways at the Aes Sedai. Almost all. He risked a look at Nynaeve. She had turned back to watch as well as listen, though she still avoided looking at Lan. He caught the wisdom's eye. She shook her head. She had not told the Aes Sedai that he was not 2 rivers born. What does Moraine know? Manetheren, Agomar said slowly, nodding. I would not doubt that blood. Then more quickly, the will brings strange times. Farm boys carry the honor of Manetheren into the blight, yet if any blood can strike a fell blow at the Dark One, it would be the blood of Manetheren. It shall be done as you wish, Aes Sedai. Then let us go to our rooms, Moraine said. We must leave with the sun, for time grows short. The young men must sleep close to me. Time is too short before the battle to allow the Dark One another strike at them. Too short. Rand felt her eyes on him, studying him and his friends, weighing their strength, and he shivered. Too short. And that is the end of chapter number 47. And I will be reading chapter 48 in my next video. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend that you watch the Wheel of Time series on Amazon Prime. And I want to thank everyone for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will put my contact information in the description down below in case anyone wants to contact me or send me something. And as always, everyone have a wonderful day and be safe. Bye-bye.